Boeing says it's operating in what it considers the most complex environment it's seen since World War II, from record demand for commercial jets and defense platforms to strains in the supply chain and geopolitical headwinds.
How many of your employees have been fired for retaliating against whistleblowers?
Senator, I don't have that number on the tip of my tongue, but I know it. It happens.
Tensions exploded at the highest levels of American industry when a seemingly quiet announcement sparked an unprecedented clash between one of the nation's most beloved manufacturers and the political authority seated in Washington. At the heart of it all stood Boeing, a pillar of American aerospace, and a daring strategic decision to relocate a portion of its manufacturing to Mexico. Within days, the move triggered a devastating response from the highest office in the land, an ultimatum in the form of a proposed 200% tariff on any aircraft built outside United States borders. That threat wasn't merely symbolic. It posed an existential danger to Boeing's presence in its own domestic market. It began with a phone call, brief, intense, and behind closed doors. On one end was the President of the United States. On the other, the Chief Executive Officer of one of America's most iconic companies. The phone call happened on Sunday. What was said during that conversation would ignite a high-stakes confrontation between political authority and corporate independence. In this deep dive, we'll unpack how one decision by Boeing triggered international retaliation, investor panic, and a ripple effect through cities and industries across the globe. What followed was not retreat, but bold confrontation. Boeing's Chief Executive Officer, Kelly Ortberg, did not surrender. Instead, he stepped directly into the public spotlight and made a decision that sent shockwaves through financial markets, inflamed political rhetoric, and forced global supply chains to brace for chaos. The tension had been building for months. Boeing had been quietly exploring ways to slash costs and increase operational efficiency after years of reputational disasters and financial strain. Moving some assembly operations to Mexico was, from a business standpoint, a practical step, one that reflected a broader trend in the global manufacturing landscape. But in a climate charged with nationalist trade policies, it became an economic flashpoint. The response from the White House was lightning fast. Any Boeing jetliner not built within the United States, the administration declared, would face an import tax of 200% if sold to American carriers. That would effectively price Boeing out of its own primary customer base. But instead of backing down from the plan, Ortberg made a striking move. He went public with a message that underscored the gravity of Boeing's long-term strategy. He emphasized that Boeing's decisions were driven not by short-term politics but by global competitiveness, stakeholder value, and supply chain resilience. In doing so, he transformed what had begun as a tariff threat into a test case for corporate independence in an increasingly politicized economy. Meanwhile, the international consequences arrived swiftly and brutally. China, one of Boeing's most significant customers, responded by raising tariffs on American-made aircraft by as much as 125%. Deliveries were halted immediately. Dozens of aircraft already manufactured or in advanced production were left stranded. The president took to Truth Social to say that China had reneged on a deal with Boeing, leaving billions of dollars in inventory completely abandoned. The ripple effects extended beyond Boeing to hundreds of suppliers, logistics firms, and local economies in cities like Wichita, Kansas, and Everett, Washington. Rather than absorb the blow quietly, Ortberg pivoted brilliantly. He announced Boeing would redirect inventory to emerging markets in South and Southeast Asia, as well as Latin America, regions showing explosive airline growth but facing fewer political barriers. The move wasn't only reactive, it was strategic genius. It signaled a vision of long-term independence from the volatility of domestic politics. Against all expectations, Boeing began to stabilize remarkably. In the first quarter of 2025, Deliveries soared to 130 aircraft compared to 83 in the same quarter of the previous year. Revenue surged by 18% to nearly $20 billion. Although free cash flow remained negative, it exceeded analyst forecasts, and Ortberg reaffirmed expectations for a return to positive territory before year's end. Yet the fallout was not purely financial. One of Boeing's largest European customers, Ryanair, warned that any increase in aircraft pricing due to tariffs might prompt a shift to Airbus or China's COMAC. The message was crystal clear. Multinational clients expect consistency and affordability, not political entanglements. More than a corporate dispute, this confrontation exposed a larger dilemma facing global businesses today. How can a company maintain international agility without being accused of domestic betrayal? For Boeing, the answer was nuanced and powerful. Ortberg framed global flexibility not as an abandonment of American values, but as a requirement for sustaining the company's future. His position resonated with other chief executives quietly navigating the same tension. Companies like Apple, Ford, and Tesla, deeply reliant on global production, observed closely. Ortberg's stance gave implicit permission for others to push back against political pressures that challenge operational sovereignty. Still, Boeing's challenges remain incredibly complex. The company is recovering from deep reputational damage following a series of high-profile safety incidents, including the 737 MAX crashes and a 2024 mid-air incident involving a detached door panel. These weren't just technical issues, they were crises of public trust. At the same time, Boeing's space ambitions have faltered dramatically. The Starliner program, once seen as a rival to SpaceX, has struggled with repeated technical failures, including thruster problems and helium leaks. And yet, amidst the intense scrutiny, Boeing appears to be embracing a recalibrated approach, one that preserves its American identity while maintaining global relevance. Its European rival Airbus already operates across 5 continents and has not faced the same political scrutiny. To remain competitive, Boeing must walk a narrow path. Adaptable, but rooted. Global, yet loyal. The stakes are absolutely immense. Federal contracts tied to Boeing total in the tens of billions of dollars, including pivotal defense and aerospace projects. Some lawmakers have begun questioning whether Boeing's strategic direction aligns with national interests. That scrutiny may intensify depending on how the situation evolves. What this episode underscores is how fragile and interconnected global manufacturing has become. Jetliners require years of planning, thousands of components, and partnerships across continents. A single tariff announcement can jeopardize the economics of the entire system. Shortly after Boeing began exploring the idea of relocating some of its manufacturing operations to Mexico, the response from the White House was swift and forceful. President Donald Trump issued a stern warning. If Boeing proceeded with the move, any aircraft produced outside the United States would be subject to a 200% tariff upon entry into the domestic market. During a crucial exchange with the president, Ortberg offered a personal assurance on behalf of the company, reaffirming Boeing's commitment to national interests, particularly regarding projects like Air Force One. He emphasized that the aircraft would meet the highest standards of capability and affordability, aligning with the needs of the U.S. government. Ortberg's move to publicly confront a presidential administration wasn't just unconventional, it was almost unheard of at this scale. Corporate leaders typically seek private channels, backroom negotiations, and neutral press statements. But in this case, Boeing took a calculated risk, stepping into open opposition rather than silent compliance. Adding to this complexity is the rise of alternative competitors. Chinese aerospace firm COMAC is rapidly gaining momentum, particularly in Asian and African markets where demand for mid-range fuel-efficient aircraft is growing explosively. Meanwhile, Airbus continues to capitalize on its position as a politically safer supplier. Boeing's pivot toward India and Southeast Asia suggests a different vision of the future, one where the company's growth is no longer overly reliant on any single government alliance or region. Markets in Indonesia, Vietnam, and India are expanding rapidly. These countries are investing in new airports, expanding their fleets, and developing their own aerospace ambitions. Boeing's increased engagement in these areas might allow it to bypass some of the constraints imposed by Western political volatility. Back at home, scrutiny is mounting intensely. Congressional oversight committees are beginning to examine not only Boeing's contract portfolio, but also its long-term production strategy. Some lawmakers argue that a company so deeply integrated into national defense should not have the latitude to move critical operations abroad. Others counter that penalizing innovation and efficiency in the name of patriotism risks making American companies less competitive globally. Kelly Ortberg's leadership has, in effect, become a lightning rod for this national debate. His decision to reject political pressure and prioritize strategic autonomy is not just shaping Boeing's trajectory, it's influencing how other companies approach the same dilemmas. In financial circles, analysts remain sharply divided. Some view Ortberg's bold posture as a necessary course correction for a company that has been too reactive in recent years. Others warn that confrontation with political leadership, no matter how justified, could backfire in ways that are difficult to control. What cannot be denied is that Boeing has become a litmus test for the future of American industry in a global economy. It is no longer enough to make world-class products. Companies must now navigate a world where every move is interpreted through the lens of nationalism, security, and economic leverage. The next phase of Boeing's evolution will likely hinge on three critical pillars: transparency, diversification, and credibility. Transparency, because the trust deficit built up over years of crisis cannot be repaired with silence. Diversification, because the risks exposed during this tariff conflict highlight the vulnerability of over-reliance on any single market or government. And finally, credibility, because in the aerospace industry, reputation is everything. All of this unfolds under the watchful eye of an industry undergoing massive transformation. The demand for air travel is expected to rise sharply over the next 2 decades, driven by growing middle classes in Asia and Africa. At the same time, pressure to decarbonize aviation and shift towards sustainable technologies is intensifying. How Boeing adapts, how it defines its place between nations, markets, and political interests will determine whether it remains a flagship of American industry or becomes a cautionary tale of corporate overreach in an era of growing economic nationalism. This story, still unfolding, is about more than trade policy or executive decisions. It's about the future of global capitalism in a world increasingly defined by borders, tariffs, and ideological divides. And Boeing, for better or worse, has become the ultimate test case.